3 or 4 topics in chapter 2.
Awesome.
Let me switch. I think you can switch.
Yeah, I think you need to stop sharing your screen and then
Yeah, let me
maybe
stop
I'll look
sharing, and
for.
then you get the button. Yeah.
All right, so welcome to today's little overview on chapter 1 and 2. Hopefully I can join the other days too when we run the book club, just to give some additional assistance, information. So anyone that hasn't taken the CKA, it is going to be the prerequisite for this course. So if you wanted to take the CKS, you will need to pass the CKA first. And it still needs to be valid at the time when you're joining or when you're signing up for the CKS. So make sure that you have that in place. If you're completely new to those certifications, not a big deal. I think the CKA is a pretty good starting point, especially if you already have some experience with administration features or your task or your role as an administrator for Kubernetes. I would say, generally speaking, just as a summary for those certifications, I think they are great for getting kind of like some guidelines around what topic are going to be interesting or important to fulfill a specific role in the Kubernetes ecosystem. I wouldn't necessarily take the CKA and say, well, I know everything about Kubernetes now. I think it's just sets certain guidelines for you to study. And it doesn't mean you will become an expert, even though the certification is pretty challenging at times, specifically on the time end. So if you're new to the certification or exam environment, you will see you actually have a lot of time for all the questions and exercises that they will propose to you to solve. So make sure that you jump from one question to the next one. It's completely fine usually to just skip over a question if you're not really sure how to solve it. Just make sure that you solve as many points as you can in the 2 hours that you have. And the same thing applies really to the CKS. So if you're planning to think about or getting more involved in security topics, and I think this is becoming more and more a topic for anyone really involved in Kubernetes, whether you're an application developer or an administrator, there's quite a bit of overlap for both roles on the security side of things. So just for me personally, I was actually not super involved in security topics in Kubernetes before I started to write this book. I decided to just get more deeply into those topics, into the tools. And I think it's a good outlook on what's around in the Kubernetes ecosystem on the security side of things and how to solve it more specifically. So I can only recommend it, this certification to really anyone. I would even say that if they were to open it up for the application developers as well, so if you have the CKD beforehand, I think it's completely fine on that end as well. You don't necessarily need to have administration level knowledge about Kubernetes. Well, the interesting part about the CKS is that they now try to involve open source tools as well quite a bit. So it's not just about the Kubernetes core features. It's really a lot about the ecosystem as well, what kind of open source tools there are to solve certain problems. And some of those tools are covered in my book and will also be asked for to solve during the exam as well. So much for the, I would say that is pretty much like overview chapter number 1. So if you're interested in security topics, this is definitely an interesting certification to get. I would say if you just want to have an outlook on security topics, this is good. It also brings in a couple of those tools that you may or may not know about. In terms of the first chapter, you will see that it's somewhat a collection of tools and topics that don't necessarily fit together. They have it under the title cluster setup. And if you look at, so let me jump there. So I'm just opening the book here on the O'Reilly platform. I don't actually have a PDF at hand. Hopefully you received the PDF when you after you added yourself to the list. Hopefully that worked out for everyone. But you can see here overall in the chapter on cluster setup, they touch on topics like network policies. So if you took the CKD or the CKA, you probably already know about network policies. So that is just a rehash and I guess a more deep dive on that topic in general. Then as part of this chapter, they want you to understand the tooling for basically parsing and identifying potential security risks in your cluster components. So here, what I bring forward is the tool Kubebench. Kubebench is an open source tool that you can run against your cluster as well. And what it will find is certain potential issues with the configuration of your cluster components. So for example, the API server, if you use certain flags when you start the process for the API server, that may cause a security risk. The benchmarking is being stood up completely separate from Kubebench, and it basically is a catalog of best practices on how to configure your cluster components. Then we have a topic here that you may already know from the CKA as well. Configuring Ingress with TLS termination. That wasn't really part of the CKA, and you will see it's just an extension to what you already potentially know about it. And then they have two more topics here, protecting node ports, API endpoints, and user interface access. So again, that is somewhat a conglomeration of different topics here. So they want you to understand what kind of ports are usually exposed for a Kubernetes cluster. How do you secure them? How do you secure a user interface for Kubernetes? For example, if you were to have Rancher or the Kubernetes dashboard. So I just brought up the dashboard for Kubernetes, the open source dashboard, and explained how to secure end user access, so authentication and authorization concerns. And you will find that in the book as well. But of course, they try to, I would say, broaden certain titles just to make sure that you look into other tools as well, that you're not just stuck on a single tool and learn that really well. They want to get or provide you with broad exposure. And then last here, as the last point, they mentioned verifying platform binaries against their checksums. So really all there is to be able to download the checksum from the official download page for typical binaries like kubecontrol or kubectl. For kubeadm and those kinds of tools you would usually use as a Kubernetes administrator. So you can see quite a bit of topics fall already into the chapter 2. And it probably, if you wanted to show some demos, it would probably take me easily like 2 or 3 hours to go through it, maybe even 4, depending on whether we wanted to dive deeper. Any questions about this so far? If not, I would say let's just talk about them on a high level one by one so you kind of know what to expect. See if there was anything here in the group chat.
No, not particular.
Okay, awesome. So let's talk about some of those topics here on a high level. So network policies, just as a rehash and a little summary on what you already learned about network policies for the CKA and now also for the CKAD. So network policies basically control the communication between different pods. So you may remember that every pod has a virtual IP address that will be assigned when you start the pod in the cluster.
Ben,
yeah.
Just a question. I think folks are having trouble with the text font size.
Oh, let me see if I can make this bigger somewhere here.
On the settings things on the yeah.
We'll do this.
Yep.
So network policies basically help you with controlling the directional traffic between those pods. And it's important to understand that by default, every pod can talk to any other pod in the cluster by the IP address. I mean, you can probably imagine that this may cause security concerns, given that we have this default behavior. And what I usually try to do in the book, I try to bring up those scenarios here with a little image. So if an attacker would come in, would gain access to one of your pods through whatever method, they would be able to, potentially talk to any other pod within your cluster, whether it runs in the same namespace as the hijacked pod or not, doesn't really matter, because as soon as you find out the IP address, or if you communicate with those pods through a service as well, you would be able to launch your next attack to another pod within the cluster. So what would basically make sense here based on the architecture of your application stack that you're trying to deploy to the cluster is to identify which portion of your system, of your application, needs to talk to another portion of your system. So when we talk about microservices, it's probably pretty clear that the front-end functionality of your application, for example, needs to talk to the backend, and probably directional towards the backend. The backend likely doesn't need to talk back to the front end, but that kind of depends on how you crafted your architecture. So try to think about those rules that you will want to model with the network policies in the form of thinking about how does my architecture look like? Does this pod need to talk to another pod? And then craft those rules based on top of that. So in my example here, I created a little setup of 3 different pods, each of which run either in the same or different, actually they're in the same namespace here apparently. And then I went through the motions of setting up a network policy here. So let me see if I have one example. So what I do here in the beginning, you can easily verify that pods can talk to one another by the IP address. That's what I'm proving here in the beginning without setting up any kind of network policy. And then what you can do is to verify that the directional traffic has been permitted, or if it prevents it from being allowed. If it prevents it from happening. So if you're not familiar with network policies at all, what you would usually want to do is to follow the principle of least privilege. So you may actually know this principle from other contexts. Maybe you set up a firewall before in your capacity as an administrator. And the same kind of principle applies to network policies here as well. So if you want to say in the beginning, I want to lock down all traffic independent of what direction it is, independent of who talks to what, and then I want to add additional rules. I want to layer additional rules on top of that will then allow only the directional traffic that is required by my architecture. So if you looked at network policies before, you may have seen that there are so-called default rules, and default rules let you set up this principle of least privilege. So you can lock down everything, for example, on the level of a namespace. So for example, what I say here is I want to basically deny all ingress traffic from any pod within the namespace. So this little curly brace thing here means select all pods within the namespace G04, and then basically apply this rule to only ingress. So incoming traffic. You could also add egress here if you wanted to, or just use egress, depending on how you want to craft it. And then what you can do on top of that, once you have this in place, you can layer additional, more fine-grained rules on top. And the way you would do so is by simply creating another network policy object. So let's go here and show one example of such a network policy. So this may look fairly familiar. So you don't actually have to reference the default network policy anymore. It will just be additive. So when you create another network policy object in the same namespace, it will try to basically apply both of those rules that are being specified by network policies. And you can see in
Yeah,
this case, yep, go for it.
yeah, that's a. I've seen some people have the misconception that they think they have to create this deny all policy first for denying everything. So the understanding is that the better remember is like remember that everything is allowed, right? And if you create this policy that you see here, it's the same effect of saying the minute that you put a like let's say a network policy and you say like policy types is ingress for this example, you can put ingress and ingress and then block everything. Then the sections at the bottom is what are you opening. So if you create this just as an example, if you're taking the exam and they tell you like you need to block all traffic ingress and create this rule that you have here, allow this connection, but you only allowed to create one resource of network policy, like don't freak out. You can create this policy and you have the same effect of like it's an ingress, deny or ingress, and then this is the thing that you're opening. I don't know if you follow.
Awesome. Yeah, that was a good comment. So I would say for the exam, understand kind of like the rules of crafting those network policies. Have a look at some of those default network policy rules. You can actually find those in the Kubernetes documentation. They're all on the same page. And just play around with those rules a little bit. What I found useful is a specific GitHub repository. And let me see if I can find that right here. Oh. It's kind of slow here. Hold on. So this one I found super useful. So if you go to this one, it actually gives you a bunch of different scenarios that you can use to learn more about it. And you can see they usually try to visualize those scenarios as well. And then they walk you through the different network policy objects that you would have to create to model exactly this kind of scenario.
Yeah, it's becoming the canonical example. Yeah, this is the one that I used a few years ago
Yeah,
when I
nice.
took it. Yeah, yeah.
Awesome.
You also mentioned in your book the Cilium GUI, right? The network policy.io.
Yeah, let's quickly go there. So this one lets you basically visualize the rules of your network policy or policies. So let's see if you go in here. This could be useful if you craft something more complex, or you're not fully sure how the effects will look like for the network policy that you're crafting here. Then you can easily visualize other pods or kind of like directional traffic here. Let's see if I can copy paste this. Maybe this may or may not work. Ugh. Let's do it without the ports and see what happens.
I think it's read only.
Oh, it's interesting. How do you enter things here?
You edit from the GUI. For example, you can click
Oh,
on
up here.
namespace. There is edit button on the right on right side of the any square. You can find like an edit button.
Oh, where is it? Sorry.
On the middle there is in namespace. You can click on edit button.
Oh, gotcha.
Yes,
Okay.
that
Oh,
one.
that's new. Okay,
You can
gotcha.
give the policy name, policy namespace.
Okay.
Interesting. But you should be able to paste in there, right? At the bottom.
Yeah, I
what
thought
you
so
had.
too. I thought that was modifiable.
Because you can
No,
edit.
it's read only that one.
Oh,
Really?
well, they must have changed that recently then.
I thought I used to play with that.
Yeah,
I know.
now it's read only. Before it was edit also, write read.
Oh, okay, that's good to know. Well, unfortunately, I like this a lot, so I'm not sure why they locked it down. But before, you could basically copy paste your rules inside of here, or like type your rules, and then like the visualization would change as well.
I see. So you can use the GUI to
Yeah.
add things in there, and then would give you the YAML representation. I see.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah. It has a button. Create new network policy. No.
Well, I need to
Has,
go back
yeah,
You
into
can
the.
also, I think also you can upload the file.
yeah, it has an upload policy YAML. So it might
It's
be.
on
Oh,
the
it's
left. On the
this
left, yes, that one.
one. Oh, gotcha.
I see. I see. Okay.
Well, you can give this a try. I think it was definitely useful in understanding network policies and your own rules much better. Cool. And one more thing to mention here, if you're trying this out on your local machine, let's say you use Minikube or something else, a different kind of cluster, make sure that you have your network policy controller in place. And you could, for example, use Cilium as one of those implementations for CNI, which also comes with network policy support.
Yep. Or if you're using a cloud provider like EKS, now we support
All
it.
that, yeah, absolutely.
We didn't support it for a few time, but we recently supported it. Now
Oh, sweet.
network policies in EKS.
Awesome, awesome. Let's see what else we got. Let's see how we're doing on time. One more thing I definitely want to show you is Kubebench, because I think it's
Oh,
kind of a cool tool.
one thing I wanted to add on network policies, as tips that I remember, is if you want to indicate, I want to allow traffic from this namespace or to that namespace, and you need to use the namespace selector. uh, Kubernetes, you used to have to put a label on the namespace with something, right, like name or something. New versions of Kubernetes, they added a selector already, that comes by default. So if it's there, I would suggest use it, because then maybe you get evaluated to see if you use the right label, and the label comes with Kubernetes in the newer versions. Uh,
So
yeah,
you're
and I
saying
think
when a new namespace is being created, it will have a
label.
default label key value pair.
Yeah, it's I think it's kubernetes.io metadata.name, and it will have the label. So use that one.
Oh,
Used to
gotcha.
not. A lot of people, I don't know. I think I got that wrong or something. I did something wrong, but yeah, the label is already there. So use it to select the label, and then you can select the pods. Um, Also another tip, and then you had some tips, good tips into your book, which it was, if you want to block, if you want to allow this pod to talk to everything except this one IP address, and you give the example of the metadata on the host if you're a cloud provider, then using the CIDR 000, and using the word except the IP, the IP address. So you give good examples in here. The other one to remember that people get, I also, not related to the exam or in practices, people create egress rules, but they don't allow DNS on UDP or TCP. So learn what are the ports for UDP and TCP for DNS. So you want to configure something and something is not working, maybe it's because you also block DNS, and that's why DNS not working. So just things to watch out when you're working with network policies. That's what I can remember from top of my head.
Yeah, nice. Yeah, here's one example for such a network policy. So you can basically define IP addresses or CIDRs and things like that as well. So you're not just restricted to label selection. This is another option just to keep in the back of your mind if you were to be asked about it.
And as always, I guess, and the reason is CKS is requires CKA because some of the basics that you should already know, like how do I know the syntax of this YAML, right? You use kubectl explain. That's what I use, kubectl explain, and get the CRD specs. They're not CRDs, API specs out of the using kubectl explain, and then network policy .from .to, and then That way you can get it, or try to go to the API references in the website.
That's right.
Kubebench.
Kubebench.
I remember running it myself, like Kubebench CLI in some terminal, and then going over like the rules.
Yeah.
Or the suggestions, right?
Super easy to actually try it out on your own Kubernetes cluster, whether it's local or not, doesn't really matter. They actually also have support for cloud providers. So you will find a way to basically execute a job from the ones that are checked here into version control. So for example, here for GKE, there's a dedicated job that knows how to validate the configuration settings in your cluster in Google Cloud. And the same thing is true for other kinds of scenarios. So effectively, they want you to know, or like get to know at least one of those tools. Kubebench could be one of them. It's open source, so you can just go ahead and try it out yourself. So let's say you wanted to quickly run this, how this works, or one quick way to run it as a one-time operation is to simply instantiate a job definition. So as you may know, a job basically is a one-time operation that creates a new pod and then runs a process inside of it. So within this process of Kubebench, they look at the configuration of your cluster components, and then they will provide you with a report that you can inspect and then make further modifications to the configuration of those components. So for example, let's see if I can quickly make this happen. So let's say I want to start Minikube here. And then what you can do is to basically download the URL to this file. So then in the meantime, let's go to job.yaml and let me get the binary for that one. So the raw, I think. So we'll run this. You can have a look at the definition, but it's not super important that you understand that. Just wanted to demonstrate how this report actually looks like. So once your cluster is ready, you can, for example, say kube cuddle apply-f, and then simply point it to the corresponding YAML file. This will then create the job. So this one not completed yet, so we'll wait until it's done. So it's currently creating your pod, and will then execute the logic that it needs to execute. So at some point of time, it should be done, I believe. So this may take a little bit of time. But once it's done, you can have a look at the log files of the pod. And then it will basically give us instructions on what to do. So let's see if this already produced some logs. And you can see here that it will give you a summary at the end. What I would likely look at here is the failed checks. So let me make this maybe also a little bit bigger.
Yeah, like the exam may say run Kubebench or look at these Kubebench results, and there's, I don't know, 3 findings or 4 findings.
Mm-hmm.
Fix them and run Kubebench again to make sure there's 0 findings. Or maybe they don't tell you to do that, but you should do it, right? To make sure you fix them correctly.
Exactly. So basically, like, you may not even need to know about Kubebench, just know what to do in case you were to see such an failure message or warning. So you can see there's a bunch of things that they print out for the API server. And then let's see if we have like a failure here. For example, ensure that this parameter is set for the API server. So the important thing to do now is to know where to find the configuration file for the API server on the control plane node, navigate there, edit it, and basically add the corresponding flag with the value that they proposed here.
So Ben, I will say, I mean, I should send this feedback to the people grading the exam. I would say that this exercise is more a CKA task than a security. Yeah. You're not doing anything about security here. This is kind of like a security person is sending an email with this thing to the CKA person, and the CKA person, yeah, I'll put those things in there, but I'm not proving that I know what they meant.
Yeah, exactly.
Right?
I mean,
put this flag, make sure the API server has this flag. Okay, I'll put the flag. I don't know what it does.
Exactly.
and I can
Plus,
pass the
like
exam.
as an administrator, you actually have to know where to change it. So, for
Yeah,
example,
that's a
for the CKS,
CKA task.
it's
Yeah,
an administrator kind of like task.
but
Yeah. Right.
security, right?
Well, I mean, it looks at security related flags, but ultimately the actual operation that you need to run then in turn is kind of like modify like the configuration file of a cluster component. So I would agree.
Yeah, it's a gray area, right? Because also you
Yeah.
could be like, I was thinking that maybe they give me something broken in security. I need to fix it. I need to be an anyway. You have to be an um, but be aware of the security aspects on this con- um, control plane, right?
Mhm.
Controllers.
And you can actually find the textual description of those benchmarks as well if you search for it. Let me see if I can find it here.
The CIS benchmarks, right? They go with the CIS. Yeah. Yep.
Is it this
Is
one?
there different? There's different ones. Are you looking for the official CIS?
Yeah, I'm looking for the official one that simply describes it. Maybe they have it in here anyway. So usually I would be able to find it easily when I Google for it. Oh, here. So if you go here, you will actually
Yeah, the
find what
benchmark
they're
itself.
testing for.
Yeah.
Let's see. I thought they had like a table with things. Well, I guess you have to download it now. Well, never mind. It was open at some point, but it will basically tell you what flags they're checking for on which of the different Kubernetes cloud providers and environments. So you can check this out on your own. So that is basically what they want to have covered here.
Yeah, this should be pretty easy for most
Yeah.
individuals, right? At least last time I took the exam, it was not challenging. Just following, changing the configuration. Either it could be kubelet, right? They can find a flag or a configuration about kubelet, and then tell you like the suggestion will tell you what is the thing to add.
Exactly. So let's see. There are two more topics. I actually think three more topics in this chapter. So if you know how to configure an Ingress and you had a chance to look at how to make HTTPS, the HTTPS access available as well, then you may know what to do. So ultimately, they are not talking about Ingress creation or the basics anymore at all. That is basically covered by the CKA. But basically, what they want you to understand is how to create the secret object and then how to basically assign the secret object name to the ingress. So this portion of the chapter just walks you through the creation of the secret, what you need to understand. Just make sure that this is of type TLS. That's important. And then that basically determines what kind of keys you can set here. And then within the configuration of the ingress, what's going to be relevant is this spec TLS section. And you can see that we're referencing the name of the secret object right here. That's pretty much it. Know how to do it. You can practice this relatively easily on your local machine as well.
Yeah, this is the thing that I found the minor I guess
Oh yeah.
improvement. The thing actually the thing works. I said I think in posted somewhere that it doesn't work, but it actually works. But it was a tiny thing. So look at that host, right, and then look at the CN value on the certificate that you create above.
Yeah, you can see the host here is different than what I had used when I generated it. So this should have been the domain
Yeah,
name.
yeah. That's the rat. I suggested the rata, Ben. Thank you for the
Yeah, I saw it. I already accepted it. Thank you so much. Super helpful.
yeah. But yeah, this is I don't know could they ask, like if they can pen file or certificate. If I give you a certificate, um, would you be able to find the host name, right, or domain name out of that certificate using up? So the steps are that use OpenSSL, create it, make it a text, and you might be looking at the CN and it doesn't work, and it doesn't work is because you're not looking at the extension section of where you have their alternate host names, right? I don't know if I mean.
Yeah, I think what I always find useful, especially in preparation for those certifications, think about what kind of questions they could potentially ask, and then maybe
Yeah.
just set it up yourself. Like maybe set up a failure, like a misconfiguration or something like that, and then try to solve it yourself. That is always super helpful, I think.
Yeah, and then polishing on OpenSSL CLI, right? Some of the flags to create a self-signed certificate, or the steps to create a CA, to create a key and create a CA, create a CSR, and then create a certificate. Um, those are good networking, like they're admin type of things, and not security, but in terms of security, that this maybe the certificate matches the CA, right? How do you validate that a certificate, given a certificate and CA, is valid, right?
Yeah. Good deal. So there's two more sections, I think, in this chapter. So one they named protecting node metadata and endpoints. So here they just want to raise awareness for the default ports that you have in a Kubernetes cluster. So just be aware of them. And then here's a minor overlap to cloud providers as well. So you may know that they have some endpoints for retrieving meta information. And Carlos just mentioned it before here that you can also lock those down with network policies. So have a brief understanding on how to make this happen. So I'll keep this relatively short. And they have one more section on protecting GUI elements. So if you were to set up Rancher or the Kubernetes dashboard, back in the days, everybody said, don't install any more UI, it can cause issues. But if you were to have a UI or some dashboard, at least make it only accessible, I would say, within your VPN. Don't necessarily expose it to the internet. And then depending on what product you're using, there are likely options for setting authentication and authorization for users. So make sure that you don't provide admin access to everybody in your organization. Just make sure that you create new users with slimmed down or limited permissions to do certain things. And what I'm doing here in this section, I'm just describing how to make this happen with the Kubernetes dashboard as an example. So what came into play here are service accounts and RBAC.
Yeah, this one was interesting. One thing to remember is new versions of Kubernetes, the token is not created automatically. So you have that in the book, the command to create a Kubernetes token for the service account. And I think this section, I really like this section that you explain here, of creating the two users, one admin, one read only, and then testing the logging in with one token versus the other token, and seeing that the read only cannot do anything.
So you can see here, you can basically find all this information on the Kubernetes dashboard documentation page, but effectively you can just create a cluster role and then a cluster role binding for different roles within your organization. So when I say role here, I mean like developer or administrator or project manager, so more on that level. But you can model that with the form of RBAC, basically. At least
and always remember to not struggle with all this YAML. Always use the kubectl or kubectl create, right? And then kubectl-h to see the examples of creating these row bindings. All this stuff is like shortcuts. Use all the shortcuts in the kubectl and not struggle with the YAML. K9s is not allowed from what I remember, Luke, unless if somebody have taken the exam lately, can say.
Yeah, it's not allowed. Like all you got is kube control, kube ADM. That's pretty much it.
Yeah, I don't think it will. I don't think it will help you a lot. It's a lot of like simple kubectl commands. At least for K9 browsing and inspecting and logs, and you have a lot of pods and things like that, it's useful. For this, is they giving you a small context. I'll always remember switch the context. As I see, the same as CKA. They'll be working on the wrong cluster.
Exactly. Yeah, you want to make sure that you actually get the points for problem solved. So if you're trying to solve something on the wrong cluster, you will probably notice it at some point because oftentimes they set up objects for you. And then if you don't find them, you probably know there's something wrong. But just make sure at the beginning of each of those questions, there's usually a command that you can run automatically that sets the correct context. So make sure that you do this every time. Also, if you were to go back to questions that you skipped over at a later time in the exam.
Good question, Jamel, on Tmox. I don't know. I don't know, somebody knows Tmox. I don't know.
I think it is allowed.
Maybe, yeah, maybe a small Linux distribution. Okay, good. Thank you, Jesse.
I think they do have it. You should find information about that in the FAQ.
Yeah, in
If
the
you,
book, yeah, the booklets website, they have all that information there.
yeah.
This
And
section on the binaries,
yeah,
which looks
that is
pretty
the last
simple,
one.
right?
Yeah, it's
Just
super.
knowing that SHA-256 and get the.
Yeah, let me
I don't
show
think
you.
it's no more complex than finding the binary that you're using, and maybe they give you the SHA-256, right?
Yeah, I mean, basically, what you need to understand is where do you find that corresponding command if you don't remember it, and they will likely actually give you the checksum file as well.
Okay.
So that should be like easy points scored. And you can see here the Kubernetes documentation, I believe, also has a bunch of examples, so you can just copy
This
paste
is
them.
this is another one that section that maybe I would replay with something else, like like checking a binary SHA-256, not very Kubernetes, right? Like that's a generic
Yeah, what I
generic
noticed,
security thing.
especially for the CKS, is they actually sometimes that, or at least based on the titles, they oftentimes drift back into Linux and like just plain like OS specific
Yeah,
topics, which is fine, but I probably wouldn't make it based on the CKS. It should probably be a Linux specific certification.
yeah. That one, the binary one, that feels like maybe a waste, could be replaced with something more useful.
Yeah, I would agree. There's definitely more, like more interesting topics or more Kubernetes specific topics that they could cover. But yeah, that is super simple to do. Also easy to try out. You can see the commands right here. All you need to know, you have like say kube control or kube ADM or whatever executable you want to verify. They will likely provide you the SHA-256 file, and then you just need to run the command to actually verify if the checksum matches with the contents of the executable.
Thank you, Jesse, for the comments on. Oh, the new. I'm afraid of the new environment, the remote desktop thingy. That people say that is worse.
Yeah, I mean, also from my experience, the last time I took the exam was maybe about a year ago, and it was slower and harder to use than what they had before in the browser.
Hmm.
So you're basically working on a remote desktop, and sometimes it has a little delay, and then copy pasting was tricky, especially if you're used to like Command C and Command V on Mac. Just have to make sure that you always use Command Control C. So at some point of time, I just
Yeah,
brought
it's
up
Linux.
like
Yeah.
I basically just did this here because I just couldn't get my muscle memory right anymore. I just copy pasted like this
I see.
because it was faster for me than to remember it every time.
Good. And yeah, surprising, Jesse, on that you had the correct answers on the system. I had the impression that all these exams were like a tool or automation checks the correct answers or not. So that's interesting. But yeah, good tip for everyone. Like if you think you got more answers right and that you didn't pass, that like send an email and complain.
Okay. Yeah, it would be interesting to know how they actually score this. I would think it's probably a combination of an automated process and maybe somebody does a spot check. I'm not quite sure, but if somebody knows something about it, that would be cool
Yeah,
too.
with so many people taking it, it needs to be automated, fully automated.
I don't think so, at least by now.
Yeah. Okay. I think that was the last topic on chapter
That
2.
was the last topic in this chapter, yeah. And then
Phil.
usually what I have here is a little summary, some basics to understand about this, about the topics per chapter. And then at the end, there's some additional sample exercises if you want to play around with things. And if you want to try things out more, there are some exercises in this repository. So if you wanted to go there, this may be helpful for some of the topics.
Yep, I'll put that in the docs. I'll also put the link to the GitHub repo for the book.
Awesome.
If I can find my notes, or somebody can suggest link. Okay, let me see. Oh, okay. Somebody is already putting stuff in here. Thank you. Putting the links. So very helpful. You're an asset to this meetup. Love it. Okay. Any final questions? Feedback? Hope that you folks enjoy it and can make it next week. We'll do chapter 3. I think it's hardening the cluster.
Awesome.
You look like the section.
We will have labs at
Thank you so much for putting this together.
Yes, thanks, Benjamin.
And,
yeah, sure thing.
Yeah, now up next, I challenge myself. I'll do chapter 3 and then we'll cover that next week. Well, I have to read it. I read up to chapter 2, but yeah, this week I'll read on chapter 3. And come back next week. Hopefully I will see everyone. Thank you for joining. And it's your first time. This is what is the Kubernetes Book Club. It's a mix between learning, social, meetup type of hangout on Fridays. So thank you so much.
Thank you.